Sleeping inside a bass drum while a heavy metal band plays a concert on top of it is the closest approximation to life in the 03 level of a United States Navy aircraft carrier. But even that metaphor fails to capture the sheer, relentless physical violence of the experience. Every 45 seconds, a steam-powered sledgehammer hits the roof of the berthing compartment with enough force to throw a 30-ton fighter jet into the sky at 160 miles per hour. The steel walls vibrate with a frequency that rattles human teeth in their sockets. Dust and paint chips drift down from the ceiling like industrial snow. And just as a sailor manages to drift into a shallow, exhaustion-fueled sleep, the arresting gear wire screams overhead. When a returning jet lands, it slams onto the flight deck and catches a steel cable, which pays out across the roof of the bedroom with a banshee-like shriek that sounds like a car crash happening inside the hull. This is not a mistake in the ship's architectural design. This is the deliberate, calculated reality of life for the thousands of junior enlisted sailors who inhabit the steel dungeon. While the pilots and senior officers are often glamorized in recruitment brochures, living in relatively quiet staterooms in officer country, the E1s to E4s, the mechanics, the deckhands, and the cooks, live in a subterranean world without windows, without silence, and without an ounce of privacy. Today, we are going deep into the belly of the beast to expose the brutal, unvarnished reality of the lowest ranks on the world's most powerful warships. We will take you inside the claustrophobia of the Coffin Locker, reveal the toxic hazards of the CHT plumbing system, explain the grueling 90-day initiation known as cranking, and uncover the harrowing truth about why being docked in a shipyard is statistically more dangerous to a sailor's mental health than being deployed in a combat zone. You will see the underground economy, the physical toll of the flight deck, and the unique, dark humor that keeps the backbone of the fleet from breaking. To understand the scale of the disparity on an aircraft carrier, one must first understand the strict, unforgiving geography of the ship. An aircraft carrier is a highly segregated floating city 18 decks high. The most coveted real estate is high up in the island tower or in the forward sections of the upper decks, where there are portholes, quieter ventilation systems, and spacious wardrooms. But the junior enlisted crew lives in the berthing compartments located either deep below the waterline or directly jammed beneath the hangar bay and flight deck. The center of a junior sailor's entire existence is the rack. This is their home, their sanctuary, and their prison. It is a shallow metal pan, roughly 6.5 feet long and 28 inches wide, fitted with a 3-inch fire-retardant foam mattress that offers almost no comfort against the unforgiving steel. The racks are stacked 3 high, creating a dense, suffocating wall of humanity. If a sailor is assigned the top rack, they are inches from the overhead ventilation ducts, which often blow freezing, recycled air directly into their face. The middle rack is a slot so narrow that sitting up is a physical impossibility. The occupant must slide in horizontally, entirely flat like a letter being pushed into a mail slot. The bottom rack is widely considered the gutter. It rests just inches off the deck. Every time someone walks by, their boots strike the floor right next to the sleeper's head. The dust, lint, and ambient filth of 80 people living in one room constantly settle on the bottom bunk. Underneath the thin mattress lies the pan, a storage compartment about 4 inches deep. This, along with a single, narrow stand-up locker that is barely wide enough to hold a single uniform hanger, is the entirety of a sailor's personal space. This is where they must store their civilian clothes, their letters from home, their electronics, their hygiene gear, and their snacks for a deployment that could last up to 9 months. If a sailor is claustrophobic, the rack is a form of psychological torture. They sleep in the fetal position, surrounded by the snoring, coughing, and shifting of dozens of other exhausted men or women. To preserve night vision for the lookouts and to enforce a semblance of a sleep schedule, the berthing compartments are bathed in red light after hours. The passageways glow with an eerie blood-crimson hue, Walking through the berthing at 300 hours feels less like navigating a military vessel and more like moving through the arteries of a living, breathing mechanical beast. The flashpoint of misery and conflict in this subterranean world is the head, the communal bathroom. Imagine sharing a single bathroom with 80 to 100 strangers who are chronically overworked, sweating profusely and covered in industrial grease. A standard junior enlisted head might feature 4 shower stalls and 5 toilets. The culture of the shower shoe is a matter of strict survival. These cheap rubber flip-flops are the only barrier between a sailor's bare feet and the crud, a virulent, highly contagious fungal infection that thrives on the wet, warm steel decks of the shower area. The showers themselves are exercises in frustration. To conserve the ship's precious supply of fresh water, which must be constantly generated by the evaporators, the Navy uses push-button timed valves. A sailor pushes the heavy brass button and receives exactly 30 to 40 seconds of water. Then it stops. They must soap up in the cold, heavily air-conditioned air, then push the button again to rinse. The temperature of this water fluctuates wildly based on the ship's overall steam usage. If the ship's laundry machines start a heavy cycle, or if the engineers demand more steam for propulsion, the shower water might instantly turn scalding hot or drop to freezing cold. It is a daily game of shower roulette. But the toilets are the true enemy of morale. The Navy utilizes the CHT, Collection, Holding, and Transfer System, a massive vacuum-powered sewage network that spans the entire length of the ship. When a toilet flushes, it sounds like a jet engine intake, a violent, terrifying suction that pulls waste through miles of complex piping. However, the system is notoriously fragile. Junior sailors, out of carelessness or frustration, flush wet wipes, paper towels, and even items of clothing. When the CHT lines clog, the system violently backs up. Raw sewage floods the deck of the head and, if not caught quickly, spills over the watertight coamings directly into the berthing compartments. The smell is an indescribable horror, a noxious mix of concentrated human waste, diesel fuel, and the harsh industrial chemicals used to fight it. The HT hull technicians are the unsung, overworked heroes of the junior enlisted ranks who must don thick rubber suits and wade into this toxic sludge to snake the drains and restore order. A major CHT spill can ruin dozens of bottom racks, destroying personal property and forcing sailors to sleep in emergency overflow areas. Before a junior sailor is ever allowed to do the technical job they enlisted for, they must face the great equalizer of the Navy, cranking. Also known as food service attendant duty, this is a mandatory 90-day assignment where newly reported personnel, regardless of their test scores or technical ratings, are sent to work in the galleys and the scullery. It is 90 days of pure, unadulterated manual labor. The lowest ring of hell in this environment is the deep sink in the scullery. Here, the junior sailor stands in a perpetually humid, steam-filled room that smells of wet garbage and industrial dish soap. They spend 12 to 14 hours a day scrubbing pots the size of bathtubs that are caked with burnt grease, powdered eggs, and baked-on cheese. They spray down thousands of plastic trays as they come off the mess deck conveyor belt, dodging flying food particles and scalding water from the industrial dishwashers. They haul massive, leaking bags of wet trash through the ship's narrow passageways to the incinerator room. Cranking is designed to build character, but it primarily builds a lifelong hatred for dirty trays and a deep, unifying bond among the junior ranks. "We suffered in the scullery together" is a foundational friendship metric on an aircraft carrier. It breaks down the ego of the new recruit and forcefully integrates them into the bottom of the ship's hierarchy. Once a sailor escapes cranking, they enter their actual workspace, which is often just as brutal. For the blue shirts, the aviation bosun's mates who work on the flight deck, the reality is a grueling physical battle against the elements. They are the ones who crawl under the belly of a 30-ton FA-18 Super Hornet while the jet blast deflector is raised, chaining the aircraft to the deck in the middle of a torrential downpour or in 120-degree Persian Gulf heat. They carry heavy steel chocks and chains, running across the abrasive non-skid surface that shreds their boots and their knees. One moment of lost focus, one slip on a patch of spilled hydraulic fluid can result in being sucked into a jet intake or blown overboard by the exhaust. Down below, deep beneath the waterline, are the snipes, the machinists, mates, and enginemen. Their world is the pit. The engine rooms and pump rooms are a cacophony of screaming turbines and hissing steam lines. The ambient temperature regularly exceeds 130 degrees Fahrenheit. These junior sailors work in a state of perpetual dehydration, monitoring gauges, turning massive brass valves by hand, and wiping up oil spills. They go into mole mode, working 12-hour shifts in the dark, hot bowels of the ship, sometimes going 3 or 4 weeks without ever walking up the ladders to see the sun or breathe fresh air. Their skin turns a ghostly pale, their uniforms are permanently stained with grease, and they become a subculture of their own, viewing the topside sailors as soft tourists. However, the most profound psychological crucible for a junior sailor is not a combat deployment to the Red Sea or the Pacific. It is the shipyard. Aircraft carriers require massive maintenance overhauls, most notably the RCOH refueling and complex overhaul, which happens at the midpoint of their 50-year lifespan. The ship is towed to a facility like Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia and essentially gutted. For the junior sailors assigned to the ship during this period, life becomes a dystopian nightmare. The ship is transformed from a warship into a massive, hazardous construction site. Thousands of civilian contractors swarm the vessel. The air is thick with welding smoke, fiberglass dust, and the toxic fumes of grinding metal. The ship's internal power and ventilation systems are frequently secured, meaning there is no air conditioning in the summer and no heat in the winter. Miles of thick, temporary yellow power cables snake through the passageways, creating constant trip hazards. The tragedy of the USS George Washington, where multiple junior sailors died by suicide between 2019 and 2023, brought this nightmare to the public's attention. The junior sailors were essentially trapped in an unlivable environment. Because they did not receive the basic allowance for housing granted to married sailors or higher-ranking officers, the unmarried E1s to E3s were forced to live aboard this floating construction site. They slept in berthing compartments filled with industrial dust, waking up to the deafening sound of needle guns chipping paint on the other side of their steel walls. They had to walk a mile across the shipyard just to find a working toilet or a warm shower, often in the freezing rain. They were expected to perform grueling maintenance tasks, stand tedious security watches over empty compartments, and live in conditions that violated basic habitability standards. The feeling of hopelessness in the shipyard is profound. When a ship is deployed, there is a clear mission, a sense of momentum, and an eventual end date. In the shipyard, the delays stretch for years. A junior sailor might enlist, serve their entire 4-year contract chipping paint in a dark, freezing dry dock, and discharge without ever seeing the ship sail. The isolation, the lack of purpose, and the miserable living conditions create a perfect storm for severe mental health crises. It is the darkest, least advertised phase of a naval career. To survive the sheer weight of this existence, the junior enlisted ranks develop a vibrant, deeply ingrained underground economy and a parallel social structure. Cash is largely useless in the middle of the ocean. The true currencies are caffeine, tobacco, and time. Because the ship's official store often runs out of popular items within the first month of deployment, hoarding becomes a survival skill. A junior sailor who had the foresight to pack 3 cases of White Monster energy drinks or a dozen logs of wintergreen chewing tobacco in their rack becomes a powerful broker. They can trade a single can of energy drink for someone to take their undesirable 200 to 600 mid-watch. They can trade a log of dip for a specialized, illicit haircut in the fan room, avoiding the terrible, uniform buzz cuts given by the official ship's barbers. Laundry is another massive point of friction in commerce. The ship's official laundry service is notorious for losing uniforms, shrinking coveralls, or returning clothes smelling faintly of someone else's sweat. Consequently, an underground laundry ghost economy emerges. Junior sailors will pay a fellow shipmate who works in the laundry department to privately wash, dry, and carefully fold their clothes on the night shift. It is technically against regulations, but it is a necessary adaptation to a broken system. Discipline for these junior sailors is handled swiftly and without the protections of a civilian court. If an E3 is caught sleeping on watch, fighting in the berthing, or stealing from a shipmate, they are subjected to captain's mast, a non-judicial punishment proceeding. They are marched in front of the commanding officer. The punishment is immediate: reduction in rank, forfeiture of half a month's pay for 2 months, and 45 days of restriction. A restricted sailor cannot leave the ship when it hits port. They must muster check-in with the master-at-arms, the ship's police, multiple times a day, and they are assigned extra duty, usually cleaning the most disgusting parts of the ship, like the grease traps or the bilges, during their only off hours. It is a harsh, immediate form of justice, designed to maintain order in a high-pressure environment. The daily routine is governed entirely by the 1MC, the shipwide public address system. From the shrill whistle of reveille at 600 to the sounding of taps at 2200, the 1MC dictates every movement. The most universally despised announcement, heard multiple times a day, is "Sweepers, sweepers, man your brooms." At this command, all junior personnel must drop what they are doing, grab a broom, a dustpan, or a rag, and clean their designated spaces. On a warship, dust is not just an eyesore, it is a critical fire hazard and a threat to sensitive electronics. Cleaning is a relentless Sisyphean task. This culminates in Field Day, a weekly, hours-long deep cleaning evolution where bulkheads are scrubbed, brass is polished, and the decks are stripped and waxed until they shine like mirrors. It is mindless, grinding labor that breeds intense resentment, but it instills a collective ownership of the space and enforces military discipline at the most basic level. Despite the cramped quarters, the awful food, the shipyard despair, and the exhausting labor, a strange alchemy happens to the junior sailor. They adapt. They learn to sleep through the sound of a catapult launch. They learn to eat an entire meal in under 4 minutes. They develop a dark, cynical, and razor-sharp sense of humor that civilians can rarely comprehend. They forge bonds in the scullery and on the flight deck that are stronger than blood. They become salty. When a 19-year-old kid from a landlocked town in the Midwest finally earns the rank of Petty Officer 3rd Class E4 and sews the Crow insignia onto their sleeve, they have survived the crucible. They have endured the steel dungeon. They have kept the nuclear reactors critical, the jets in the sky, and the ship moving forward. They realize that the admirals and the politicians may direct the fleet, but it is the junior enlisted sailor, covered in grease, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and an energy drink, who actually moves the immense weight of the United States Navy across the globe. If this unvarnished look into the grueling reality of the junior enlisted ranks opened your eyes to the true cost of projecting naval power, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to the Tactical Chow channel. We do not rely on polished public relations packets. We dissect the gritty, mechanical, and human reality of military life. Second, smash that like button. It is the fuel that helps us break through the algorithm and bring these hidden stories to the surface. Third, leave a comment below. I want to know, could you handle sleeping in a coffin locker with 80 other people for 9 months, or would the lack of privacy and the constant noise break you? Be honest. And finally, if you think the living conditions on an aircraft carrier are claustrophobic, wait until you see the terrifying reality of life inside a fast-attack submarine. Click the video on your screen right now to see how 130 men survive in a sealed steel tube